Coming to you from the WAFB digital newsroom. Today we're kind of doing a special edition of Behind the Scenes. Usually we're talking about our investigative pieces and kind of the work that goes into it, but this week marks kind of a somber, and not a kind of, a very somber anniversary for the Baton Rouge community. July 17th, 2016 was the day that there was an ambush on our local law enforcement, killing 3, injuring 3 others, and just kind of changing our community forever. So we are looking back on that time. It has been 5 years, Scotty, since that happened, and that day is still as clear in my mind as it was when it happened.
Yeah, that Sunday, and it's so crazy because you think about it and you think, on one hand, where did the time go? But on the other hand, I did talk to a couple of law enforcement leaders this week. And it was kind of like, this is just like yesterday, last week,
Yeah, there's so much. I remember after the first year thinking, I can't believe that time had the audacity to move on, because it still felt so recent. And even, 5 years later, it still does. We actually have a picture of those officers that we lost that day: Montrell Jackson, Matthew, Gerald, and Brad Garafola. And those are 3 names that I will remember until the day that I die. They were burned in, and like so many people in this community, those are names that have become immortal now.
Yeah, and we ran a story last night. We're working on a story. We're actually teasing ahead to something that I put together that's going to air at 6 o'clock tonight on 9 News at 6. And Lester Dewey actually did a story last night, and that familiar phrase from Montrell Jackson came back up: "Don't let hate infect your heart." And that was something that I think a lot of people kind of took to heart at the time. And I talked to the police chief, and we've had some challenges since then, both nationally and here in Baton Rouge. And it's something that you just have to kind of keep that as a mantra, every day, every week, to just kind of keep that at the forefront.
So coming up tonight on 9 News at 6, we are going to hear from the police chief and the sheriff, Sid Gautreaux. You've talked to him, and we've got a little preview of that right now.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to both of them. Obviously they lead the sheriff's office as well as the police department here in our community. And I wanted to talk to the sheriff because he had a unique perspective, because he was in it. He was in the thick of it when this all went down. It was, believe it or not, he was actually in Lake Charles at the time. He was going to Lake Charles for a conference. He was actually being sworn in for a role with the Sheriff's Association. So he was out of town at the time, and he was telling me a little bit of backstory about that, that he and LSP Colonel Mike Edmondson at the time flew back via helicopter, and they actually landed there on top of the hospital. And he told me he didn't even know that they had a helipad on top of the hospital there. So
I don't think I realized that he was out of town when it happened.
Yeah, but they got back so quick, they flew straight back in, and had to just get boots on the ground and kind of navigate through this situation. So he was telling me a little bit about that. I thought it was important to kind of catch up with him and have him reflect on what happened in that day. Of course, we all remember just vividly what was going on that day, where you were when you heard that those officers had been shot and that it was an active shooter in Baton Rouge. Of course, at that time, there was a lot going on. It was not too long after Alton Sterling. It was sandwiched in between that and the historic flood. So, I mean, at that time, you and I know, it felt like it was almost something every weekend.
Right. It was the summer of 2016 was traumatic, not only for the families of these officers, the families who lost these men and had to deal with the fallout of this, but for the entire community. It was such a it was just such a traumatic time. There was a lot of loss, there was a lot of unrest, and then we dealt with the flood.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was kind of what I talked to the police chief, Murphy Paul, about. He was not with BRPD at the time. He was with Louisiana State Police at the time. He was there before he took over with BRPD. And so he kind of talked a little bit about, just what they've done since then. And, you brought up that word trauma. He was talking about, not just the trauma that the community felt, but the trauma that Baton Rouge police officers felt at the time, losing their brothers and then, having to go on to work, and, in the years that have followed, just kind of how they've dealt with it. It was one interesting thing, and we've talked about it before with the chief, but he talked about, increasing some of their training, also setting up peer-to-peer counseling. You think about police officers, you often think about, macho men and women, who don't need any help, who don't need to, show their feelings.
They're the ones protecting us, but you got to remember they need someone to protect them too.
They're people too, and so they need somebody to talk to, and so they had a grant actually that gave them a lot of money to be able to set up that peer-to-peer counseling, because he says, it's so important. When you look at policing and, everybody wants, officers to go home. Everybody wants officers to do the right thing 100% of the time. And he said part of that, though, was saying, you know, I need to step back, I need a break, or I need to step back, you know, I just can't go in today, or I can't do it today. And, you know, that helps everybody.
Absolutely. All right, so we got some sound bites that we want to play for you now so that you can get another preview of the story that will air tonight on 9 News at 6.
You know, I've been in law enforcement a long time, and it's terrible to lose anybody at any time. But I can tell you that was the worst day of my life, and I'll never forget what took place that day. To lose young men like that were dedicated to service, you know, they all were epitome of what law enforcement should be.
We can never feel the pain that the family members of those officers feel. The officers who work side by side with them every day, their supervisors. We're going to continue to lift them up in prayer.
You know, you can just hear in the sheriff's voice just how much pain is still there 5 years later. And, you know, that's something that's not just for him, it's something for a lot of us. And, I got him to talk a little bit about just what it was like to kind of be a leader at that time, to not just come back and be knee deep in the situation, but then also have to navigate it, to, you know, be the leader, to heal.
And get your department through that.
Right. So, you know, again, so fresh for him, and you know, so fresh for a lot of folks. I mean, this is a very tough weekend for, you know, law enforcement. It's a very tough weekend for family members of law enforcement. I know there's a conference. The wives of some of the officers are in town this week, and you know, that's something that they're putting together some events to kind of do this weekend to honor those men who lost their lives and the ones that are injured, because it's important to remember them as well.
Absolutely, and that's actually pretty cool. It's the Police Wives Association, and so this is actually made up of family members from across the nation of law enforcement, and what part of their mission is bridging the gap between the community and the police force, and that's a role that we've seen some of the family members take on. I spoke with today Desha Gerald, who was Matthew Gerald's wife, and a lot of people remember she found out shortly after his death that she was pregnant. That little boy's 4 years old now, if you can believe it. I got to see those kids. They have grown up and are happy and healthy, and it's a beautiful thing to see. But as she said, life goes on, and you keep moving forward, but that grief is always still with you. She said she likes it this time of year to give back to the community, and so that's one thing that she was doing, was working with the police wives to do that, kind of turning the grief into something, to a positive impact in the community. That's kind of a beautiful thing to see. But certainly this is an odd time of year. But we certainly do want to look back and pause, because it was such a significant event in Baton Rouge.
Sure. You know, and that was one of the things that the sheriff talked about too. He says, you know, it's great to acknowledge that grief, but it's also good to just see those families continue to move on, and to continue to grow, and continue to feel that support from, you know, the community, and you know, people that are at home watching this right now. It's so important for them to kind of feel that love and support, and it really just helps them keep going. You know, he says, you know, nothing gives him greater joy than just seeing those families continue and know that they're doing okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have much more of that. The interview with the police chief and the sheriff tonight on 9 News at 6. You'll hear from Desha Gerald and her family tonight at 10. And we'll also have for you online information about those memorials if you'd like to participate or share your honor. And Scotty, you have your story up already for people to check out.
Yeah, we have this story. It's been posted now, I think, for a little more than an hour. Again, this story is going to air tonight on 9 News at 6, so about a little over an hour from now. And I know you said that you mentioned you had talked to Desha, and that's going to be tonight?
Yeah, tonight at 10. So we'll have full coverage of this anniversary for you. Kind of a tough time, but also to see how far we've come, and ways that the community is still embracing these families, and remembering the sacrifice that law enforcement officers certainly make. So thank you folks for joining us, and hey, if you have any thoughts or like to kind of reach out with a virtual hug to these families, feel free to go to our WAFB Facebook page and leave your thoughts and comments there as we go through this weekend.
Yep, they would love to see that.